Hello, I'm Michael Finley, write-in presidential candidate for 2016. You might have heard of me, you might not. I'm not going to the debates because I don't have a political party, and debates are limited to a particular political party. I have had a lot of people ask me what I thought of the Republican debates, so I thought this is a good opportunity for me to discuss some of these things. I did watch the Republican debates, and I'd like to tell you why I'm not impressed and why I'm bothered some of the things that were said and discussed, focused on at those debates. First, let's talk about what was said about funding political campaigns. Donald Trump said, basically, that he buys politicians on both sides of the aisle. He buys Democrats, he buys Republicans. Talked about buying Hillary Clinton. Talked about buying a lot of the people that were on the stage with him, having donated their campaigns. A few of them said, "You haven't donated to mine, Donald." I really get the impression that some of these Republican candidates, the main reason they don't want Trump to win the nomination is because he won't be there to donate to their campaigns. Now, in saying this, Trump said, the system is broken. And yet neither Donald Trump nor a single candidate gave a proposal to unbreak that system. How are they going to fix that system? They apparently don't want it fixed. They like being paid money to sell their souls to the wealthy in the United States. This is what we're talking about when we say there is an oligarchy. When the Princeton University professors released their study a little over a year ago, is finding that the United States is not a democracy anymore. It is an oligarchy. They documented it. The wealthy get their way most of the time, while the average American voters, even when they have a strongly held opinion, do not get their way. This is because we have so much money in politics. It needs to get out of politics. My proposal is to set up free election campaigns. We have a government. The government has websites. We have state governments and city governments and county governments, and they have websites. It would be very easy for them to have a place on those websites for people who are legitimately campaigning for an office to post their views, to shoot videos, and post them on there. It should not be about TV production. It should not be a popularity contest. It absolutely should not be a money-raising contest. If we want a legitimate, valid, high-quality government, it needs to be about ideas. It needs to be about intelligence, knowledge, and ability. It also needs to stop being about career politicians. Now, there actually does happen to be one politician who is trying to do away with career politics and career politicians, and that is Rand Paul. Rand Paul is a career politician, and he's the son of a career politician, and yet he's pushing to end career politicians and throw out the career politicians. Okay, well, you're a career politician. Why don't you leave? Oh, because you like being in Washington. You like getting paid outrageous amounts of money by people like Donald Trump to buy your vote. That's why. It's time that we have real election reform. It's time that we have real term limits put in place. The majority of Americans, the vast majority of Americans, want term limits on all congressmen and senators. They want it. Why aren't they getting what they want? Because the wealthy 1%, people like Donald Trump, your multimillionaires and your billionaires, they don't want those term limits in place. It's easier to buy votes from politicians if they're running for re-election over and over again. So once again, the oligarchy are getting what they want, while you and I do not get what we want, regardless of how many of us want it. So there needs to be someone who will actually change that. And by the way, it requires a constitutional amendment. Now, I happen to have a doctorate degree in law. I happen to know a thing or two about the Constitution of the United States. And I know, based upon the cases in which all across this country people have enacted term limits on the state level, over and over and over again, they've been enacted in pretty much every state in this country. What happens? They get overturned because they were not done by constitutional amendment. We have to amend the United States Constitution to impose those term limits. Now let's look at another issue. Let's look at the taxes. You had some creative ideas about taxes. And you have people talking about flat taxes. You have people talking about how terrible the IRS is, and blah, 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 blah. None of them have talked about the fact, and it is a fact, that the 16th Amendment that created the income tax in the first place was never ratified by the required number of states. That's right. You go around the country, you check the records maintained by every state, and you will see that the required majority of states did not ratify the 16th Amendment. I'm the only one talking about throwing out the 16th Amendment, which undoes the income tax entirely. That would throw out the IRS and require us to start over. We also have issues about economics. And you heard a lot of different ideas about economics. And you have one guy saying, oh, I really turned things around economically in my state. You have other people saying, I've run billion-dollar companies. You have all these ideas about economics. Oh, I'm going to balance the budget. I balance the budget in my state. I balance the budget at this, Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 company. Blah, blah, blah. Nobody gets to the real problem. The real problem is that every single dollar spent by the United States of America is debt owed with interest to a private company. The Federal Reserve is not a government agency. It is a private company. It is part of the Bank of London, owned by the Rothschilds family. And we have been borrowing every dollar that our country spends into existence since 1913. It's time to stop. If you want real economic reform, if you want to stop having runaway inflation, which, by the way, it's the runaway inflation that causes so much trouble with salaries, where the minimum wage keeps having to be raised to keep up with the inflation. That's the real problem. Then you have to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. You have to do what the Constitution says and have money coined by the Congress of the United States, not by a private company, not borrowed into existence. We have a very unstable economy. We have steady inflation because we keep spending as debt. I'd like to see any one of you balance your home budget and keep your finances good if every single dollar that you spend is borrowed. Let's see you do it. Every single dollar. You can't do it. It's obvious you can't do it, and nobody is talking about getting rid of the Federal Reserve System, except there is somebody who was, it's me. So that's an important point. How about this one? There was a lot of talk about getting tough with our military, with different threats to us. Russia, China, and particularly Iran and ISIS. And I do agree that emasculating our military is not a wise idea. And this confuses people because one of my platform points is that we should have no more unnecessary wars. However, we do need to be prepared to defend ourselves. And there are a lot of threats to us. Some of the reasons for those threats are things that our country has done wrong in the past. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be ready to protect ourselves. We should be changing. We should be improving our behavior as a country. We should be better leaders of this world to lead the world toward peace. But in the meantime, we better be ready to protect ourselves. Now, here's something interesting. Every single Republican candidate talked about ISIS, and not a single one of them mentioned that documents obtained by Judicial Watch through the Freedom of Information Act show that ISIS is created and backed by the USA and its Western allies like England, Britain. That's right. This is documented by the Pentagon itself. And yet every one of these candidates is talking about ISIS as though it's some enemy of the U.S., not one of our instrumentalities. You know, the fastest way to get rid of ISIS is stop funding them. Stop giving them weapons. That's what we've been doing. That's what we're still doing. Here's my question. Since the evidence is out there, since it's quite obvious where ISIS came from and what they're doing and whom they're serving, are these candidates uninformed, badly uninformed, or are they part of the disinformation campaign? And it's possible that if they're part of the disinformation campaign, that they're unintentional participants in that campaign. Maybe they're just believing what they're told. Either way, do you really want someone to be your president who doesn't even know what has been revealed in documents that came from the United States Pentagon? I don't want those people to be my president, not a single one of them. Here's another crazy thing. They all talked about Iran being the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the world today. If you can believe the mainstream media, the #1 terror threat in the world today is ISIS. Guess what? ISIS is not sponsored by Iran. Iran is Shiite majority. ISIS, according to the mainstream media, unless they're lying to us, I mean, why on earth would they lie to us? They say that ISIS is made up of Wahhabi jihadists. The Wahhabi are Islamic fundamentalists. This is a branch of Islam, a sect of Islam that started roughly a century ago. And they are part of the Sunni. The Sunni have nothing to do with the Shia. They are bitter enemies. In fact, Iran is doing more than any country in the world to fight ISIS, especially in Iraq. They've actually gone into Iraq and helped to fight ISIS, where the U.S. is doing nothing. Oh, well, we are doing something. We allowed them to drive away with our tanks and our MRAPs and our Humvees and all kinds of dangerous vehicles, war vehicles. And even though it took them hours and hours and hours to drive the convoys out of the places where we left those vehicles in Iraq, we didn't shoot a single missile at them to stop them from taking those vehicles. Yeah. We're pretty nice that way, apparently, to terrorists. So the problem with this idea, which was said by every single Republican candidate who spoke about Iran, is that they're flat wrong. The main terrorist threat in the world is ISIS. ISIS is created and backed by the USA, the United Kingdom, and other Western allies, by the United States' own admission in documents that were obtained by the Freedom of Information Act from the Pentagon. They're supposedly Wahhabi jihadists, which is Sunni, and guess who does back them? Not Iran. They're backed by our main allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, to whom we give huge amounts of money, and then those two countries in turn give huge amounts of money to ISIS. So, you've basically heard a bunch of nonsense from the Republican candidates. You've heard actually outright lies from every single one of them. None of them is getting to the bottom of the real problems in this country or in this world. None of them is getting to the bottom of what really needs to be done in the Middle East. I'll be shooting a separate video soon about what's really wrong with American foreign policy in the Middle East. And even on the subject of Hillary Clinton, none of them got into the real problems. None of them discussed how Hillary admitted to backing ISIS as the Secretary of State. None of them got into all the documentation done by people like Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh regarding the rat lines of weapons being transferred from where the CIA backed ISIS in Libya to where the CIA is currently backing ISIS in Syria. None of them, not a single one. And we're supposed to believe they're such enemies to Hillary Clinton? They're so ideologically opposed to Hillary Clinton that they're going to be the one who can really stand up to her and beat her in this election. No, they don't even have their facts straight. They didn't even bother to throw any hard-hitting punches on Hillary Clinton. And in fact, Donald Trump has financially supported Hillary Clinton and admits it readily. No, if you want a real president, if you want a president who will do something different than any president has done in several decades, you have to elect somebody from outside the system. That's why I'm asking you to write in the name Michael Finley on your 2016 ballot. It is the best way you can say screw you to the system, to the powers that be. Keep in mind, there are not two separate political parties, Republicans and Democrats. They are one political party with two faces. I call them the Two-Face Party, and Donald Trump just demonstrated that. In fact, there are news reports that just came out in the past week that the 60 wealthiest donors to the Hillary Clinton campaign are the same 60 wealthiest donors to the Jeb Bush campaign. So if you don't think there is one two-faced party, it doesn't matter, because the people who really run this country, the wealthy 1%, they know that there is one two-faced party, and they are the ones controlling it by giving the same kind of money to both sides. So whoever wins is in their pocket, and those wealthy oligarchs get their way, instead of you and me as average Americans getting our way. Vote for change. Make real change happen. Michael Finley, 2016.